Are you there on the call?
Yeah, hello. Good
I
morning. Good
hope
afternoon,
I'm
everyone.
pronouncing your name right.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So, everybody, Farhan is going to talk about Power Automate from zero to hero. I'm sure we're going to see some really interesting use cases over here. So, Farhan, over to you. Please introduce yourself
Okay,
and get started.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's start to share window. Okay, let's start. It's good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Farang. Welcome to the session. It's called Power Automate from zero to hero. And just let me introduce myself very quickly. I'm a freelance Microsoft 365 and Power Platform consultant and trainer, and I like basketball, running, hiking. I'm a member of the SharePoint user group in Catalonia, in Spain, and I'm a proud FlowNat, a super user in the Power Automate community. What's this session about? Well, I wanted to create a session about how we can train our user, whether they are IT users, some users used to use this kind of technology or some products, or whether they are power user or users with no knowledge at all about, in this case, about Power Automate. I've been doing several trainings, and I realized that many times users get frustrated about using Power Automate because they don't know the concepts, and they get frustrated very quickly because sometimes there are some concepts that are difficult to explain. So as I've done several trainings, I wanted to introduce you the steps or what I've been doing to train this user so they can learn and they can understand what they have to do, and finally that they are able to create complex flows by themselves. So it's all about user adoption. It's about training our users in using Power Automate. So which are the topics I'm going to cover? When I'm planning some trainings to end users, I plan different sessions, and I start from the very beginning with very simple concepts. After that, I show them how to use or to work with dates, because it's very usual that they have to work with dates. After that, working with some complex expressions and using advanced functions, and finally some more advanced concepts like maybe approvals or data filter queries and this kind of stuff that we are going to see. But this is the guidelines I follow when I have to train these users in different companies. I've realized that if I follow these steps, users understand how to use the tool, and they are really able to create these flows by themselves. So when I introduce Power Automate to any kind of user, we go to the web page and I show them, okay, you can start a flow from blank or from a template or from a connector, and you have this kind of possibilities. Obviously, of course, I introduce what's going on with Power Automate, but normally I've realized that many people start some flows from templates. Should we use templates? Maybe you don't agree with me, but I prefer not to start from templates. I mean, users go to the templates page, choose any of the templates that they have, and they see a lot of actions, and they really start to ask questions because they don't understand some of the actions. They get lost very quickly. So what I do is start from zero with an empty window in Power Automate. I introduce what are triggers, what are variables, and sometimes, or almost every time I use the if condition. So, which is the most simple demo I can show our users, or how we can start to train our users in learning Power Automate. I really prefer to start from zero. So I select an automated cloud flow and I skip all these steps and I start from here. Yeah, I start from here. No actions, no triggers, empty screen. And then, for example, a very simple example that I like to use, it's like I'm going to get the weather forecast for tomorrow, for example. I'm going to select a recurrence flow. I can explain our users that we can trigger a flow every day, for example. I'm going to get that, for example, at 3 p.m. and I'm located in UTC +1, for example. Okay, it's here. And I show the users that they can add as many steps as they need. So this is really simple. I mean, I have a recurrence flow that's going to be triggered every day at 3 p.m. And here I normally use, for example, the MSN weather to get the forecast for tomorrow. For example, here I'm going to get the weather forecast for tomorrow. Spain with metric values, and here, for example, adds what I use to introduce an if condition. Here, it's very important to explain our users that when I call an action like this one, that I get the weather forecast for tomorrow, will have some output values. And this is the way we can show them that, okay, after that action, we have plenty of values that you can use here. This is what I explain to our users. You can get, for example, and here I can search for any property from any output. Let's see if I have any rainy properties. Yeah, rain change. I show the users, okay, we have an action that it's called get the weather forecast, and we have many output values, and one of them is this one, rain change. So I'm going to use it and say, okay, if rain change is really done, for example, 30%, I want to post a message, for example, in Teams. So I'm going to search for Teams box. Okay, there are plenty of boxes or actions here, connectors, team, and here I'm going to search for the post a message in Teams. So I have a Teams here, this very quickly for community. I'm going to choose the weather forecast channel, weather news. And here's what I like to show them, that I can add any parameter to the message box and without using any expression. I mean, it's going to rain, for example. Rain and prop ifs, and here I'm going to concatenate, sorry. No, it's rain change. And I like the summary too, sorry. The summary. So I'll show this kind of flows. I'm going to get the weather. This is a really simple flow. This is starting from zero, a recurrence, get the forecast. I introduce the condition and I use this kind of properties. Let me copy this action and add it to the no branch, because in Barcelona, I think that it's not going to rain tomorrow. I'm going to paste this action, and I said it's not going to rain, and I will add this. Even in this case, I like to say, okay, you can rename your actions too, so they are more explicit. If anybody reads or have a look at this flow, maybe can understand what are we doing. If you see big flows with many actions, with no comments or no explicit names in that actions, you can get very frustrated very soon, because this is a small flow, but if you have a more complex one, sometimes it's difficult to follow the branches and what are we doing in each branch. So I usually recommend that we should use more explicit, at least comments or action names. So I save it, and I show our users how to do this. I don't find this very difficult. I mean, almost all the vast majority of users understand what we are doing, and they understand the concepts of actions, triggers, and output parameters. These are the three main concepts I like to introduce, apart the condition one. So I can test it. I'm doing really quick this demo because you probably know this kind of things. I only wanted to show you how a simple or sample flow that we can use to show, oh, it seems that it's going to rain tomorrow in Barcelona. So I executed the flow, and here is the result. So end users, or IT users, but end users understands this, quite clearly. I don't find any problems in explaining this, and people normally understand what we are doing here, and the Power Automate basics, I like to say. Okay, I've been going very quickly because I think that this most basic concepts, you can understand them. But when I work or train users in the companies, okay, they say, okay, this is a really simple flow, but we have to work, for example, with dates. Or so working with dates is normally a little bit complex. In this section, I'm going to introduce the apply to each, the datetime actions, and some basic expressions. This is a journey where I started from zero, some basic concepts, and we are going to the next step that is going to work with dates. So I have to be very clear with the trainees and tell them, okay, in working with dates in Power Automate, you have to take into account that we always have to work with ISO 8601 format. 4 digits for the year, 2 digits for the month, 2 digits for the day, T, and as you can see, the expression, 2 digits, hour, minutes, seconds, even milliseconds, and a Z at the end. This is have to be very clear. Although we are working with different systems in Power Automate, the dates should be treated, have to be treated in this way. It doesn't matter how we see them in our source system. In Power Automate, we have to work with this. I'll introduce, working with Excel, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit tricky. As we will see now in some demo, you will see that in Excel, the dates are stored as integer values, and this is the number from 1st of January and 19th. So this have to be very clear too. Sometimes we work with Excel, not with SharePoint, with database, with SQL Server. We work with our users normally, or depending on the project or the situation, they work with dates, and this can be very tricky. So we have to be very clear that working with dates in Excel, it's different than working with dates. It's rather different than working with dates in SharePoint or database or SQL Server. So let's do a couple of demos. I want to create a new flow. Okay, sorry. I'm going to create a new flow. You will see that I always start flows from zero. I'm going to, in this case, start the flow with a button, and I'm going to create a flow. And here I'm going to get SharePoint, and I want to read the items that I have in a list called expenses. I'm going to show this list. Here I've got a list of expenses with a title, an expense type, an amount, and a status column. So in this case, I'm going to, I want to get all the items. Okay, I'm going to find per community. So the expenses table and expenses list, and I'm going to do a new step, and I want to get those expenses that are greater than $100. So in this case, I'm going to select control, and I will write the condition. I will select the expense or the amount, sorry, amount. I don't find it, so the amount, and I will say it is greater than or equal, let's say it's greater than $100. Okay, and that's the point where I smile a little bit, because I found this many times where our users get lost. I said, oh, Farhan, I've written a condition and Power Automate automatically added this apply to it. What's going on here? I'm struggling. I don't understand what is happening here. I found this situation many times. This is why I'm smiling a little bit, because I'm remembering some users say, what's going on here? And I explain them, okay, as we are using the get items action, this is getting more, or I don't know how many records I'm going to get. 1 record, 2 records, no records, 100, 1,000 records, I don't know. So I explain them, okay, we have to go through all the records. We have to inspect all the records that are going out from this action. So this is the reason why Power Automate added or detected that we have to use an apply to each. So if we explain this in this way, users normally understand what's going on here. That's why Power Automate is adding this apply to each. We have to go through all the records. It doesn't matter how many records do we have. If we have no records, well, if we have one, or we have many. So I add this condition, I've added, and if the amount is greater than 100, for example, and I will add another condition. For example, I'm going to select the, for example, the status value. It's not, or it's equal to pending. I'm going to update that item. Okay, I'm going to point in this case, and I'm going to update the item. And here is where I show them that there are plenty of actions, new actions about SharePoint, new actions with new versions. As there are a bunch of actions, I like to right here, I'd say, okay, I'm going to update the item, and here I'm going to choose or select another, let's see, okay, it's for community, the list name expenses, and here it's when I explain how to map some different parameters. So I said, okay, the get items action, it's showing, or it's getting the ID, the list item ID. It's an integer value. So this is why the reason it's showing in this box, and you can use it. So I use the ID, and here it's shown more values because they are string ones. Here I'm going quickly, expense type value, expense date. I'm going to and the amount, and yeah, the status value is going to be rejected. So this is a really easy way to introduce our users the apply to each action. I'm going to add this SharePoint let's see, SharePoint expenses. I'm going to save it, try it. I can try it, and let's see, I'm test it, and okay, and it's going to work. I hope. It seems that it's working. Okay, it's going through all the items. As you can see, there are 9 records, and I can go through all the results for each record. So this is a really easy way to show our users how to use the apply to each, how to use the yes range. And obviously, I didn't work with dates, but here it's when I show our users that I have, for example, many datetime actions. Here in the datetime, I'm going now to modify this flow so to inspect those items that are older than a month ago. So I'm going to get a datetime action. In fact, I'm going to get the get past time, and I want to get the interval. So I want to go 1 month before. We know if we work with Power Automate that this can be done with some expressions, but before working with expressions, I like to show this to our end users. You have an action called guess past time that gets the current time and subtracts, in this case, a month, and we can use the output of this action in, for example, the condition. And I can add a new condition and say, okay, let's see if the expense date is older, or in this case is less than or equal to the get past time, the output that it's coming out from the get past time action. So I'm choosing this value. So this is a really easy way, again, to show our users how to work with dates. I know, I repeat, I know that we can use, we can create an expression to get this past time. If you work or you're an expert user about Power Automate, it's not too difficult to get this expression, but I rather prefer to explain in this way to the users. When we work with more complex expressions, I will introduce some expressions similar to this one. But at this point, I use these gain datetime actions and use them in the flow. Let me modify again some of the values. Okay, I'm going to do this, and I modify the list and exit the grid view and just check it out again. Okay, I save it and I'm going to test it. I think that everything is right. Okay, I'm going to test, and let's trigger the flow. And yeah, it's working, I think. And when it's working, the Excel, or when I'm debugging it, I like to show this to our users. Hey, have a look at how Power Automate is working with dates. We have the ISO 8601 format, and this is the way we treat, in this case, dates inside Power Automate. And here, well, okay, it seems that it's working, and I probably updated some of the list items. So this is I think that this is a really nice way to explain the use of the apply to it and the use of dates in Power Automate. But our users work with Excel normally too. So I'm going to create a flow tool and show you how we can work with Excel dates. In this case, I'm going to use an Excel that I have it here. I can show it to you. And I have an historical device order in Excel with so many rows, and I want to work with this kind of dates, and we will see how Excel is treating these dates. I'm going to get the Excel online, and I want to do a query in this Excel. Okay, the Power Community, the documents. I'm going to select the file. it says historical device order, and I'm going to, we have to have a table in Excel. If you don't know it, we need a table inside the Excel. And here, for example, I'm creating, maybe I can, or it's an easy way to introduce the data operation, and we can use the create HTML table. I want to get all the lists or get the rows in an Excel table. I want to create an HTML table and probably send it by email. Let's rename this Excel data. I'm going to save it and I'm going to test it. So I'm going to throw this Excel and I'm going to continue, and this is really easy to understand to our user. It's working, but as you can see, dates are shown like an integer value. So our user says, oh, what's happening here? What's going on? If we don't explain this clearly, again, our users can be frustrated. They say, oh, this is an integer value. How can I treat this value and display it rightly? I mean, this is the table, and I can show this to, I have to send this by email, and I can send it this information by email. Sometimes even if you don't explain this, they create the flow, everything is working, and when they go to that last step, said, "Oh my God, I have this. What do I have to do?" Good news on the way. Just discovered this week. This action has been modified by the product team, and we have a new output format or a new configuration option here in the list rows in an Excel table. And have a look, we have the serial number and the ISO 8601. So if I check this out, let's see if it's working. Okay, I'm going to run, and let's see if it's now working, or it's showing the dates in a nice way. So yes, have a look. This is great. It's this is a very recent. I mean, this change. I think it's only a week since we have this new parameter. I'll show you again the data format. So now we will be able to select, I want to work with serial numbers, I want to work with ISO 8601. For sure, we want to work with this, but there are plenty of flows that use the serial number. So just I wanted to show you how do I explain these users, how they can use those integer values and manipulate them. So I'm going to leave it in a serial number, and before creating the HTML table, for example, I can modify this, and I'm going to introduce the select action. Yeah, I'm going to add an action, although I could do it. Okay, I introduce it here. Okay, I introduce it here, although I can do this in the HTML table. But here I can introduce the select operation, which can be used to select only some values. Here I'm going to select, for example, the device name, and I'm going to check the device name. I'm going to check the price. I'm going to check the price, and here the proof date, and here it's when I start introducing expressions to our users. I say, okay, from the output of the Excel table, I want to select only 3 fields: the device name, the price, and the proof date. But I want the proof date to be formatted. I don't want the integer value. I want the value as ISO 8601 date. So here it's when I explain our users that we can use expressions. So we can use formulas. And this is a very important point too, because if people is not used, our trainees are not used to use or to work with expressions, it can be a little difficult. But if they have been using, for example, Excel and using formulas in Excel, you can say, okay, as you are using formulas in Excel, you can use a similar kind of formulas, expressions inside Power Automate. This is the way I explain this to those people. I say, okay, here we can use an expression, and in the case of dates in Excel, what we can do, it's called the 8 days function. I explain them, okay, Excel has the number of days since 1st of January of 19th. So I say, okay, we can use an ISO date, 1st of January of 19th, and sorry, and use the add this function. So I have to add to that date the number of days that are stored in Excel. And here it's when I show them, sorry, I don't know if it's a proof or proof with a D. It's with a D. Okay, approved date. I will probably have to this value, and let me show you this. So let me show you this formula. Sorry, I have this in another window, and this is the formula I'm using. So I'm going to use the add days. I'm going to use 1st of January of 19th, and I'm going to convert to an integer number the item, the requested date item, and then I'm going to format that date. So here there's a little bit, there's another trick. After converting this or with this final result, we have to subtract 2 days. There's some error in the formula and in the dates calculation, and we have to subtract 2 days. So instead of writing this, I'm going to use this expression and use it here. I agree with you that maybe our users say, oh, this is really difficult. Let me try to understand and let me try to work. This is an important point for me. If users are able to understand this formula, this expression, if users are able to understand this, it's going to be great, because if they understand this, it means that they are going to be able to create their own flows. I mean, this is a really important point. If at that point they say, oh, this is too difficult, okay, we can use maybe daytime actions, but at the end, in some points, we have to use expressions. So I have to convince them, I have to explain them that it's not so difficult, it's only a question of understanding and getting used to it. So let's see if it's working. Now in the create HTML table, I have to use the output of the select. So I'm going to add this, okay. Obviously I could have formatted the praise column too, but I'm not doing. I'm testing it, okay. And let's run the flow. I hope it's working. Yeah, no, well, it's not working. Okay, I have something, as you can see, it's something with the add days function, provide values type of string. So maybe I have, okay, I'm going to check. I forgot the int conversion. Oh, and no, that's not the expression. It's this one. I don't know what happened. I'm going to paste it again. Yeah, it thinks it's right now. Okay, I don't know what it's saying it's not right, because it's right. Okay, test it. And let's start again. Come on. Well, This is demo effect. Sorry. Let's see if it's working. I hope, yeah, the formula is right. Yeah. Yeah, it's when sometimes I explain our users and I forgot to explain to you that I like to use some kind of those expressions in the comments. Here in the actions, I have a comment section. I can add comments to our actions, and I like to write these complex expressions. Why? Because if I'm having a look at this flow and I see this, if I want to see the complete expression, I have to put the mouse over it. And obviously, of course, if we have many actions and we have to inspect all the formulas, it's a little bit, hard to solve. So I like to use this type of comments and be as clear as possible so we can understand the flow very easily. Let me check again. If it's not working, I will go on. I think that now it's working. Okay, now it's the conversion, and yeah, I'm having the approved date. But as I told you before, we are lucky, and if we use this datetime format and use the ISO, we have no problems in working with this type of conversion functions and adding days. So this is really great. If you look at the forums in the Power Automate community, we'll see a lot of questions about this topic, many questions about this topic, and it's always the same time of answer. You have to add the days and work with these numbers. So this is a little bit can be very struggling for our users. So great, let's go on. We have so many time. After that, at that point, I like to explain our users how to work with advanced expressions, with data operations. I introduce them to you. I introduce the select operation, or even I introduce the create HTML table, and here I can introduce to some advanced expressions. As the data operations, we have the compose action, the filter array, or the parse JSON, or the select operation I've been using before. These are really important actions. They are a must-have or must-used actions if you work with Power Automate. Maybe our users have to work or have to understand what we have been doing until this point. Okay, and say, okay, with these concepts, I can work with my flows, but in next stages, in next steps, I probably have to use this kind of operations. For example, in this case, I want to, or let's do some changes in our flows. We have plenty of expressions, as I showed you. We have data operations, but we have to a lot of expressions. I add the reference guide for the expressions, and we have string functions, datetime functions, conversion, logical, and collection functions. So we have plenty of functions to work with to work in Power Automate and use them instead probably of actions. So this is very powerful to use them. So I wanted to show you a quick demo so you understand how can we use those kind of actions. In this case, I'm going to modify this flow, and I want to filter, for example, get the rows that are, for example, the rows that the device orders that are from a certain date. So I'm going to filter these actions. So I have to add an action. I'm going to filter those results, and I'm going to filter the rows present in a table in Excel. So I explain our users, okay, if you want to only get a subset of the records, it doesn't matter if it's SharePoint or if it's any kind of data source, we can use the filter array. Later on, we'll see how to use the OData filter queries that are better. But in this case, I can use the filter query and I want to filter and I want to, for example, get the request date is greater than a specific date. Okay, Farad, but we have to use here, we have to use an integer value, not a date. That's difficult because I want to get all the records that are older than a specific date, but this date must be specified in an integer value according to what I explained you about the 1st of January 19. So here I'm going to use a variable or even a compose action. I prefer to use the compose action because they are faster to execute than creating and initializing a variable. And in the compose action, I'm going to write an expression. Which kind of expression? It's a little bit tricky, but I have it here. And this expression, let me show you, it's going to, this expression I have here, it's going to get the number of days between 1st of January 19th and 1st of January 2020. So what I'm doing here is using the ticks function. Ticks function gets the number of nanoseconds, of 100 nanoseconds from that date. And I'm using this function, using the sub function, I subtract one value from the other, and then I divide it with this big number, and this is going to get us the number of days. So I'm using this expression here. I'm going to compose action here. Sorry, I should have written down this in the expression. I obviously add it in a comment and use this expression here in the filter array. Ferran, why don't you write this expression here? Yeah, I can write it. And obviously don't use the compose action. Yeah, I can do it. If you feel comfortable with that, I'm going to remove the compose action. I'm going to delete this action, and I'm working in a more effective way. And here I'm using this expression directly. So I'm adding here the expression, no compose action, no variable initialization or setting a value. Again, I'm going to copy this here just to make it clear, or maybe I could write some comments. Okay, after filtering that array, I'm using the select in that array, and so I have to get the body of the output, and here it's that output. Okay, let's try it. So I'm going to test it again, and let's see if we get only of matching types. Okay, again, I have an error and it's saying something about a string and integer. Okay, I think that the problem is that this request date, I have to use an integer conversion. I mean, I have to convert it to an integer value. So again, I have to use it an expression, int item, and here I'm going to write request date. So let's see if it's working now. And this is very useful to work with our trainees. Okay, we have this kind of errors. We have to read them and understand them and be able to, in this case, cope with them and really work them. I think that it's working. I have only those, although it was about the request date. Maybe I treat it, okay, this is, and the request date, it's request date. Sorry, I'm going to, just to assure that it's, okay, yeah, and here I have used the request date. Yeah, okay, I'm right. I thought I was not I was not using the correct date. So this is working. I'll show you again, and this is showing only the items in 2020. As you can see, this is a more difficult flow. Maybe if you, as I repeat it, if you have worked with flow before with Power Automate, you don't find this difficult. But at this point, I've realized after several trainings that at this point users get struggled, they are lost and a little bit desperate, and we have to be very clear, and we have to try to them to understand these kind of concepts. This is a really powerful flow. I mean, here obviously I can create branches and send this, in this case, this HTML table by in Teams or by email, but this is a powerful flow, I think. Okay, it's only 15 minutes until the end of this session, and I wanted to explain finally in the last session of this journey I'm doing to the trainees. I like to explain them some more advanced topics. Which are the advanced topics for me? Using the OData filtered query expressions, using the trigger conditions, and more important, the error management. These are the last steps in this journey I've been doing to my trainees, and I consider them some advanced topics. So what I like to show to our users in the first, on this last session, on this last step, how to use the OData filter query expressions. We can use OData when querying SharePoint data sources or querying Dataverse, SQL, and this is even in Excel, this is really important because with the OData filter query expressions, we are going to filter the results in its source, not in Power Automate. So Power Automate will have to work with less records rather than if we don't use these filter query expressions. So this is really important to make them understand that this is very useful to optimize our flows. So what I like to show, okay, I go to my trainees and say, okay, we are going to create a flow from 0 with a button again, and getting some SharePoint items from a list. I have a list of items. I'm going to get a list of customer items. This is per community. Customers, let me show you this list. Is this one? I have a list of customers. I have 200 customers, I think. And imagine that you want to work with some customers from specific countries. So here, I like to explain to my users that we can use OData filter query expressions and said, okay, instead of using a filter, yeah, obviously I can use the filter action that I showed you before. But if I use the filter action here, this get items is going to get all the records. So if I have 1,000, I have hundreds of thousands of records, Power Automate, it's going to read them, and then Power Automate has to work a lot with the filter array. So the flow probably will be very slow. So it's much better if I filter them in the source. So I can use a filter query. In this case, I'm going to write equal country, for example, equals. I'm going to write, for example, Portugal, and for example, I have an active column, and I will say okay, and active equals yes. That's another OData filter query expression. Obviously, they have to, our trainees have to understand what's this, these expressions, OData expressions, and but it's very easy to understand. I'm filtering those records that the country column is equal to Portugal and active column equals yes. And even that, I can use another data to check a column to order by, or even top count. Okay, maybe I only need the first 5 items and I want to order them by, let me check, by the title, for example. So I can write something like this. Title ascending, only 5 items, only the records that are equal to these conditions. Let me remove this action. I'm going to, just to check the results, I'm going to create the HTML table again. And with these results, and okay, all data SharePoint. Okay, I'm going to save it and test it. Okay, test it again, and I'm going to continue and run the flow. So let's check this if it's working. Yeah, I think that maybe have a lot of columns. Maybe I can select some ones. Sorry, the select ones can be used with this, with custom, and I said title, and I had the title and the country. That's all. That's all what I needed. Okay, let's see if it's working. In this case, you are seeing that I'm using the create table, and instead of using a select, I'm selecting the columns in the action itself. So create HTML table, and here, as you can see, I have 5 records with a Portugal country. So this is great. And here we are optimizing, we are doing that our flow will be executed very quickly. So this is a best practice, and I really like to show this to our trainees. I think I don't have really much time, so I'm going to use the final demos I have prepared. Another topic I like to show is the trigger conditions. This is very important. So I can trigger a flow only when specific conditions are accomplished. This is not well known by the vast majority of users, but you can edit in any trigger some of the conditions that will trigger this trigger, that will pull this trigger. In this case, I want to show you an example. And for example, I have a SharePoint list of expenses, the one I used before. Imagine, and you can imagine that I want to trigger that flow when the send notification, when I modify, when I update any of these items, and I modify, or sorry, I check this send notification to true. So I want to fire the trigger only when the send notification is true and I modify any of the items. So I have a flow that it's going to trigger when an item is created or modified in that list, but I'm going to change or to modify the settings of that flow. And I said, okay, I only want to trigger this, I want to trigger this flow when the send notification column is true. Not always. I don't want to trigger that flow always. I mean, always every time an item is modified. No, I want to modify. I want to trigger that flow only when the send when an item is modified and the send notification column is true. This is really useful. This is an advanced concept, but this will save a lot of executions to our flows. It's quite different to add this notification rather than not using it and executing the flow every time a user modifies an item in this list or creates an item in this list. So I want to trigger only this flow when the send notification is true. And another concept, and I'll show you in the final demo, Another concept I like to show is explains the error management. In this case, I like to show our users that when using Flow, they can create an action and choosing the configure run after parameter or configuration, we can add actions that instead of executing when the flow is successful, they have to be executed when the previous action to start and wait for approval, in this case, is this action, has failed or has time out. Obviously, in this action or in this section, I like to explain the approvals, but sometimes it depends when we have to explain the approvals, we use it or I explain it or not. So I can test it, and it's only 5 minutes to the end of the session. I'm going to test it, so I'm coming here. And what I'm doing in this flow, it's if I create an item or I modify any one of them, this is rejected, this is pending, for example, I'm going to edit this item and I want to throw a flow. Okay, I want to send a notification. Yes, and I will change the amount and I want to save it. So this flow should be executed because I checked the send notification, and let's wait a little bit. Yes, that is, and the flow has been triggered and it's starting an approval. Okay, I should go to the approvals and approve or not. And with it's doing this flow, it's approving or not the expense. So it's 4 minutes before the session. I like to leave this part for some question and answers. Anyway, thank you very much for attending this session. It's been a great pleasure, and ask me whatever you want.
All right. Thank you so much, Farhan. There are a few questions. The first one is like, how do we work with dates from SharePoint list? Do we need to convert that to a format that is acceptable by Power Automate?
Sorry, I'm just. Could you repeat?
I
I
think
was.
you covered this question already, but I'll just repeat it again. So, how can we work with dates from SharePoint list? Do we have to convert that to a format that is acceptable by Power Automate, or is it compatible natively?
It's treated natively. We have to, if you work with SharePoint, you don't have to make any conversion. Although in SharePoint, you can see the dates in different formats. For example, here it's in ISO format, but it doesn't matter the format you have in SharePoint. When you read those items in Power Automate, they are automatically converted to ISO format. So you have to do nothing.
Okay, that's cool. And there's another question, like how do we deal with SharePoint choice fields? So for example, if I have a choice column that has options yes, no, and not applicable, can I map the values as yes is equal to 5 points, no is equal to negative 5 points, and so on?
And in a condition, you mean?
Yes.
Or
Yes,
in
in a
a
condition.
condition? Yeah, in a condition you can use the value. I mean, let me show you this. Okay, in this case, for example, yeah, I mean, I'm just looking for. Sorry, in this one, I'm going to add it. Yeah, and here in the condition, for example, I'm using the status value, or let me show you this. I have a column that it's called status, that it's pending rejected request. Instead of using that column, I'm using the value column. This is a multiple choice, and I recommend to use the value column. You have to use this value, and with this value column, you will have really the value pending and pending approved or rejected. So use the value column. Yeah.
All right. And we have another question here. I think you've covered that as well, but still, are there connectors which can filter by a specific field and then the apply to each, or alternatively a current? So basically the question is like, can we use a filter on a specific field on the connectors and then use the apply to each? Or if a connector can access a specific view, so the data is restricted to that, and then we use the apply to each instead of accessing everything from the list or library, so that we reduce the number of iterations.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so the question, you can um, you can filter and then do the apply to each. So it's better to use the filter and then do apply to each. I rather prefer always, if it's possible, please use the OIData filter query expressions. If the data source allows you, although it's very simple filter query, it's very useful to use this instead of filtering, and it will improve your the performance of your flow, and it will be improved a lot. I mean, I will recommend to use the filter query with the data, and if it's not possible, then filter and then do the apply to each.
Okay, and I also think we can also limit by view as you have on the screenshot over here. So if you create a specific view in SharePoint, you could filter those
Yeah,
items from there.
yeah.
Does that work?
Yeah, yeah, you can limit these columns if you have access to the SharePoint, and you can
Okay.
create views. I've used it, yes, I've used it too in some projects, and this can be very useful too, very tricky, because if you have many records, you can limit the columns by view. Yeah,
All
and
right.
this is very useful too.
Okay. Thank you so much, Farhan. Actually, there are a few more questions on the chat that I would recommend if you could take a look
Yeah,
because we are
of course.
quite running a little over time. And please
Okay,
also share your social media links or ways people can connect with you on the chat so that they can reach out if
okay,
they have any questions.
okay. Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure yeah to be here
Thank,
with you, and thank you.
thank you so much, Farhan. It was an
Thank
excellent
you.
session. All right, everybody. So for today, we have our next speaker, Siddharth. Siddharth, are you there on the call?
Hey, yes, I'm here.
All right. So everybody, Siddharth is going to present on how we can use Power Automate to add an Azure bot to a Teams meeting and capture the participants' information. So Siddharth, please take control and go ahead.
Thanks, yes. Hope you guys are able to see my screen.
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, nice. Okay. So can I start or you want to start the recording?
I've already started the recording. I'll
Okay, sure.
stop it in the next session. Yep.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Okay, hey everyone, welcome to this Global Automation Bootcamp. Okay, today I will be talking about and Power Automate to add Azure bot to Teams meeting to capture the participant information. Before we do this, let me introduce myself. I am Siddharth Vagasia. I'm an independent freelancer technical consultant. I'm primarily focusing on SharePoint, M365, Azure.NET, and Node.js. I have been awarded Microsoft MVP, where I also like to share my knowledge by writing articles and speaking at various conferences, and also organizing various conferences on the local communities. Okay, these are some of my social handlers through which you can connect with me. So let's first understand why this use case, right? Like the times which we are in right now, and I mean the way because of this COVID situation in 2020, and which might, I mean, possibly which would go till sometime here, okay, in 2021. There are all meetings and everything is happening remotely, and there are meetings which are happening all virtually, right? Okay, so this is basically we are talking about the Teams meetings here because we are into an M365 product lines which we are talking about. Okay, what if you wanted to, capture the participant information? For example, if you are into a project where you are doing a scheduled meeting daily or maybe on a weekly basis, okay, and what if you wanted to capture the participant information and store it somewhere so that you know that who has joined, when has joined. So in this case, this particular use case can be used. And then the other use case which I can think of is like the conferences which we are happening, which is happening right now, right? We are in the Global Automation Bootcamp where we are using Teams meeting as a platform to give the for conducting this event, for hosting this event. And what if the organizer wanted to basically capture the attendees information and put it into somewhere? Okay, so this would help again. And then as we also know that nowadays, educational institutions are conducting online classes wherein they can use similar use case to automate the attendance records. Okay, so these are the some of the use cases which I can think of, okay, which we will be talking about today. Now, let's see the agenda. Okay, first we will talk about a high-level solution on what are the different components which are involved as a part of this solution. Then we will go to the demo and see how this demo will work. And then we will walk through the development steps, okay, so that you understand how different components are clubbing together and what things we have to do. Then, if the time permits, we'll also talk about the communication graph API. On top of, I mean, the solution also involves using one of the endpoint of graph API, and there are also several other graph API endpoints which are available to extend this use case. And then we will see we can do the Q&A session. Okay, so this is high level solution. Now if you see here, okay, what I have is we have two power automates. Okay, so the one of the main component is power automate, and then there is an Azure bot. The Azure bot is basically created using Azure bot framework, and this particular use case, the bot is being extended for the calling APIs also, okay, which I will show you. And then there is SharePoint, wherein we are storing the participant information. Okay, the flow runs like this. Okay, what happens is that the Power Automate 1 would be triggered. Okay, this for the purpose of demo, this is a manual trigger. And we would be using Graph API to add a bot to a Teams meeting. So I have scheduled a team meeting which I would be using as a part of this demo. Where this is a normal Teams meeting, but it can be any meeting, channels meeting, Teams meeting, which you can use. It will add the bot to a Teams meeting, and then bot would be basically hosting uh, you having the webhooks. Okay, so this is basically the design from the Azure bot. When once you enable it for a calling API, what it will do is as soon as some events are being triggered, I mean the events happens in a Teams meeting which is happening, like where participant joins or a participant left, or a somebody muted, somebody unmuted. And also if the meeting is going on, I have seen like at certain after a certain point in time, like around 2 minutes or 30 seconds to 2 minutes, it notifies to the webhook. Okay, and when it notifies to the webhook, it will always notify the current roster. Okay, now the terminology roster is here is basically the current state of meeting. Okay, it will give you the current list of participants in a team meeting. Okay, it won't tell you who has left, who has joined, what has happened, what particular event has triggered this. Okay, but it will always give you the current state of the meeting. So for example, as soon as the meeting started and somebody started a meeting, the roster would be the API, would the webhook would receive a JSON response which will say there is a one participant in the meeting, and plus there would be a bot, of course. And if somebody else joins, then it will give you that the same JSON response would be written, but then now there would be two participants in the JSON response. Okay, and if somebody left, then again whenever the event would trigger, then it would still send the it will remove the participant who has left, but it will only give us the current state. So we have to write the logic to basically parse the JSON response to identify who has left and joined. And this is where my second Power Automate would do the heavy lifting. So what we are doing is from the webhook, I'm calling the second Power Automate, and the trigger point of this Power Automate is when an HTTP request is received. I'm passing the JSON raw JSON response, okay, by to the Power Automate, and then the Power Automate would basically parse that JSON response, and it will add the participant information into SharePoint list. So, so this is the high level solution of what how different components would be interacting with each other to demonstrate this particular use case. Okay, so important thing to understand here is that we have Power Automate, we have Graph API, communication graph API, we have an Azure bot, and we have a SharePoint as a database, right? So let's start with the demo first, like how all these things would work together. Okay, so first thing is I will make sure that my Azure bot is basically running on ngSock. So I'll just make sure ngrock, sorry. So I'll just make sure that my bot code, which is basically the webhooks, are running on my local development environment. So I have just started running it before this. And what it will give is it will give us a temporary API endpoint hosting URL, which would be basically this would be the domain, and this would be the calling API endpoint. Okay, because this is a Teams chatbot. Okay, Teams bot. Sorry. It will also have a messages API. So this API would be called when somebody sends a message to the bot once you install the bot to the Teams. Okay, but in our case, this is the calling API which would be called. Okay, so this would basically format of this would be the ngrok URL slash API slash calling. Okay, in ideal scenario, once we move this to production, what we would do is we would be basically hosting this particular Teams solution, bot solution into an Azure portal where we will get a permanent URL. So this would be published to an Azure portal as an app service, and then we will get a permanent URL which we can use. Okay, so this is running. So what for this sake of demo, what we will do is we will see that as soon as some event is happening, we will see some response being logged into console here. Okay. So let me first confirm a few things. Okay, so this is my Power Automate one, which says send bot to a meeting. Okay, here I have to, as I said, I have scheduled a team meeting. Okay, so this is the basically the URL of the Teams meeting which has been scheduled. Ideally, what we could have done is we could have parsed the meeting URL and extracted the meeting ID, okay, which is basically the thread ID. I'll talk about this later. But in this case, I have just used the variables to initialize all the required information and then adding the bot to the Teams meeting. Okay, I'll walk you through the Power Automate later. The one thing I have to make sure is that my ng API calling endpoint is what it is actually right now. So looks like it is. And I also have to make sure that the endpoint is same endpoint is been enabled in the Azure portal for bot meeting. Okay, we will talk about this later in terms of implementation. Okay, so I have all things set up. Okay, so what I will do is I'll start this Power Automate manually, and we will wait. Okay, so the Power Automate would run very instantly. Okay, it won't take much time. So what it did is it basically used communication graph API, which we'll be talking about, and it sent a request to add bot to the meeting. Okay, now it takes some time. Okay, I have noticed from 10 seconds to till 2 minutes the web API hook endpoints would be called. Okay, and if it is ngrok, it takes little more time because the tunneling happens from the ngrok URL to our local host, so it takes little time. But as soon as the first request would come, okay, there are certain design scenarios which Microsoft has given, which is well documented in their docs.microsoft.com, wherein the first request which we will get is always be an response wherein it will tell us what is the current state of the meeting. Okay, so if you see here, we got the first request, okay, which is basically a JSON object, and if you see the state is establishing. Okay, until the state is changed to establish, it doesn't. I mean, it is still basically kind of adding the bot to the meeting. Okay, so this will take again some time, but as soon as we will see an response which comes to us where it says that the state is established, then we can be sure that the bot is been added to the Teams meeting. Okay, so as I said, okay, we are logging this console, but from the same webhook, we are also calling the second Power Automate. So let's just go to the second Power Automate and see whether it is running or not. Okay. So yes, it says it is running for 45 seconds ago. Okay, but as this is just the first response, okay, I'm ignoring it. I'll tell you walk through about the Power Automate also, but I'm just ignoring the first response because there's nobody has joined. Okay, now if you see, there are two more responses which came. Okay, the second one again was establishing, so this will again we have to ignore it, and the third one which says it is established. Now I know that when the state is established, it means the bot is been added to the Teams meeting. Okay, so once it is added, what we have to do is, I mean, this can be other way around also. Okay, it doesn't mean that always bot has to be the first in the meeting. If the meeting is already going on, and if the bot starts, if the bot is been added to the meeting after somebody joins, it will still work. The only thing is that it will only able to capture, it will only able to give you the events post when the bot has been added to the meeting. Okay, so as I said, what we will do is we will basically use now start joining the meeting as a participant. Okay, I'm using web browser with another tenant so that I don't overwrite my current team session. So I'm joining this meeting. Okay. Um, if you notice here, you can see that there is one participant which says GM meeting bot demo. This is nothing but the name of my bot. So I now know that the bot is in the meeting, and it will also now start giving us the participant information as soon as something happens. Okay, so this again we have to go and watch in the console. Okay, ideally once you automate all these things, this might not be required. Okay, before going here, let me show you the SharePoint list. Okay, I forgot to show you SharePoint list. So this is where we would be storing the participant information. So if you would have noticed, the list was empty, but as soon as I joined and the webhook was being called, the entry was being created with the user's information. So in my case, what we are storing is we are storing simple things: call ID, user ID, display name, and the event type is join. Okay. Now we will understand about this call ID. Okay, but let me do one thing. What I'll do is I will have one more guest user joining this meeting. Okay, so to do that, I will use a private browsing window. I'll say guest one. Okay, because this is a guest user, it will have to wait in the lobby till somebody allows him to join. Okay, and if I go to my meeting where I was joined, I can see somebody has being waiting in the lobby, and I'll admit him. Okay, now as soon as he is admitted, it will take maybe some time, but we will get the webhook again. And if you see the second Power Automate add participant to list, uh, this would be called again. Okay, and it will take care of adding entry to my SharePoint list, which says with this same call ID and different user ID, this is the display name and the event type has been joined. Okay, so this is happening now. What will happen is every time some events would occur, okay, this process is automated. Whenever we receive a webhook, okay, it can be anything. We have to just make sure that we parse the JSON response and we understand what we are doing in terms of what information it is being sending. And the second Power Automate will take care of basically adding the information to participant list. Okay. Now what I will do is I will have the guest left the meeting so that we can see also I am adding an entry when somebody left the meeting. What I am doing is for the simplicity, I'm not updating the same entry. Okay, I'll be creating a new entry whenever somebody left, and logically if if you understand what we are doing is, as I said, the response will always give us the current state of the roster, which is basically the participant information. We will first query the SharePoint list based on this user ID. And if we see there is any user who was already there in the database, and if it is not come now, it means he has left the meeting. Okay. One thing to note here is, as this is the custom logic we are using, we might not get the accurate time, like at the minute or at the second, but we can still be able to get we were still able to be get an approximate time on when he has left and when he has joined. Okay, now if you see, I can see a third entry was created wherein it says the guest one with the same call user ID and the same user ID, he has left the meeting, and it also says he's a guest user. So this is basically the demonstration of how all these things are working together, and we are using and capturing the participant information in storing into a SharePoint list. Okay, so what I will do is I will first have the bot left the meeting, and we will move back to presentation to see what how this has been developed. Okay, so these are the high level development step. Okay, what we will do is we will first register an Azure bot, then we will enable this bot for a calling feature. Then we will create a bot, team bot solution using your teams. We would also have to modify the permissions in the Azure AD app registration. So what happens is as soon as you create an Azure bot, okay, it will also create an Azure AD app in the portal.azure where we have to modify some permission based on what activity we want the bot to be done. So in our case, we are calling the communication graph API. It means there are certain permissions which are required, which I will show you in some time. That needs to be added, and the admin consent has to be given to that particular permissions. Okay. And then there is an API URL endpoint configuration in Azure Web App Bot. So this step is basically merely, if you're doing development, it would be, you have to do it very frequently. But if you are, once you have published it, this is just one time thing which you have to do it. Okay. And then we would be creating the Power Automates. Okay. The required Power Automates. So as this is already developed, what I will do is I will try to walk you through this whole process and which all components and what all things we would be doing. Okay. So to starting with the registering an Azure bot, okay, you need to have a valid Azure subscription. Then if you go to portal.azure, you say new resource from the home page and you search for the web app bot and it will ask you basically this kind of questions which you can use. Okay. In my case, what we are doing is we are creating an Node.js based project, but okay, you can also use C# if you want. And once you do this, what you will get is you will get an app ID, which you would have to basically keep it somewhere, which we have to use it in our next step. So this is just registration of the Azure bot, okay, like provisioning and service in the Azure bot for creating an Azure bot. And this will, what it will do is it will create two things. Okay, one thing would be the Azure web app bot, plus it will also create an app service because that's where our API endpoints would be hosted. Okay. Second thing is we have to enable this bot for Microsoft Teams, right? Okay, so a simple bot, which is a chat bot, okay, if enabled for calling, what it will do is it will basically give you some extra features to support calling, wherein a bot can receive a call, bot can make an outgoing call, bot can also join an Teams meeting, and it can then do various information. And as I said, we have to use Microsoft Graph permission, okay, in your bot ID to do this thing. Okay, now how do you enable this calling bot for Microsoft Team? Okay, so let's see that in the portal.azure. So if we go to the place where you have created a web app bot, so I'm assuming we have a web app bot which is created. Once you go there, you can go to channels. Okay. Okay, looks like the demo effect, but okay, I think this might be, let me refresh it once, sorry. But ideally, if you go to the channels, okay, there you have to enable the Teams channel, wherein you would get an option to enable it. Yeah, so right now it is happening. So if you see, by default, it will create a web app chat. You can add and featured channel, and which will give you similar UI. Okay, then you specify whether you want the bot to be enabled for calling. So if you go to the calling tab, you have to check this, and then this is where you have to put your webhook URL. So in my case, if you remember, this is the same webhook URL for the ng-rock where my local development is running, correct? And if it is in a published version, you can just directly change it to the app service domain. Okay, the domain would change, the API calling would always remain same, right? So this is how you enable and bot for your Teams calling. So this is the screenshot of the same which I have walked through. Okay, and then the next step is to create a Teams bot solution using your Teams. Okay, now many of us would know that we can use Yeoman generator to create any Teams application. Okay, so in this case also this would be a Teams application because we would be creating an Teams bot basically. So if you go to Node.js and if you have all the prerequisite installed, okay, there are certain articles which are already there, which we can basically use to know about this. Because as this was not the focus of this session, I'm just giving the basic components and its overview and what all things are important for as a part of this solution. Okay, so if you say your teams, it will ask you certain questions. Okay, and if you see, this is the place like Microsoft, what is the Microsoft Azure app ID for the bot, therein where you have to put your app ID. Okay, and you also have to enable this bot for calling support. If you choose no here, okay, the other NPI endpoint won't be configured for you to be used in your Azure solution. So you have to make sure that you choose yes here. Once you do this, and Node.js based Teams API solution would be created, which we will walk through now. So this is my solution here. And if you see, this is basically an in technical terms, it is nothing but an API app service, API which we are developing, which also supports a webhook and which would be hosted somewhere. Okay. Then if you go to source, if you go to app, based on the meeting name, you will find your meeting.ts file. Okay. This is someone who has already created an Azure bot would know that basically this code is auto generated. We don't have to do anything, but there would be two endpoints which would be created. One would be API messages, and as we have enabled the calling, the second one would be API calling. Okay, so this methods would be already created. We have to just customize according to our need. Okay, I'll just talk about messaging API first. So just to understand what is the difference between the messaging endpoint and the calling endpoint. Once you have the messages API, so this is basically the API which would be called, wherein this dot on message, this is the method which would be called as soon as somebody would send a message to a bot. So if this is a, if would have been a typical chat bot, if somebody and bot is added to a Teams, if somebody says hi to the bot, this is the place where the code would go, and then that's where you have to handle your responses which the user has sent and send it to back to him. Okay, and but in the same case, in the calling API, what we have is we got a method which says on incoming call. Okay, now in this incoming call, we by default we will get two parameters. Okay, the request and response, and what we get is we get the participant information or the roster information which we were seeing in the console.log in request.body. Okay, so if you see, this is the line which is basically stringify my JSON object and it's just putting it into the console, right? Now, if you remember, what I told is what we are doing is, from as soon as we get the webhook API, we are calling my Power Automate number 2, which is the trigger point is and when an HTTP request is received. And what we are doing is we are basically passing the request body to that particular Power Automate. So this is where the Power Automate is being called. Okay, so this is the endpoint which we will get from the Power Automate as soon as the trigger says, when an HTTP request is received, and we are just passing it, and then it would be this second Power Automate which would take care of parsing that response and then putting it into SharePoint list. Okay, so nothing, no more changes here, and I'm just using Axios library to basically make the HTTP call. You can also use simple HTTP which are available, but this is far easier to use. Okay, so going back to the second thing. Okay, like permission in AD registration, right? So I was saying that we need certain permission. So let's talk about permission, because this is very important. If you don't have, the bot doesn't have the required permission, you won't be able to basically join the calls. Okay, so to do that, as I said, as soon as you create a bot in the Azure bot portal, okay, and if you go to portal.azure in your Azure Active Directory, you will see app registration, and in the owned application you will see there is an app which would be by default created whenever you have registered your bot. Okay, so in my case it is with the same name, GM meeting bot demo. Then what you do is you go to that bot, and then you say API permission, and then you add the associated permission with it. Okay, and in this case, these are the permissions which are required. Okay, which is basically we are using the communication graph create call API. So these are the bare minimum permissions which are required. You can add the permission by clicking on add permission, go to graph API. This would be your application permission, and you can search for the permission like whatever we wanted to do. So in my case, these are the 4 permissions which are required. So I will talk about, from where we will know which permissions would be required. That we will talk about once we talk about the communication graph endpoint. Okay. So once this is done, you have to make sure that you also give the grant admin consent for this thing, because this particular permissions would require the admin consent. It cannot be the delegated permissions. Okay. So moving ahead, let's talk about the Teams meeting URL, okay, first, and then we will go to my Power Automate, okay. Now, if you would have noticed any Teams meeting which you schedule, right, which you send, there is an URL which is generated for that meeting, and it mostly would be in this particular format. But if you see to an human eye, okay, it would be an encoded URL. So basically, all the special characters like question marks and the quotes and everything would be encoded, so that it's not in a human readable format. But if you decode that URL, this is what you get. Okay, so herein, what we need is we need thread ID. Okay, because this is the unique ID to any meeting, which you will get from the URL, which is join slash and till the second slash. So if you see this starts with 19 colon till thread version 2, this is our thread ID. This is important because any team meetings, whether be it a scheduled meeting or whether it be a channels meeting, it will always have this particular thread ID, which is nothing but an unique meeting ID which we have. And then it will also give you the context object as a query string, wherein this would be the tenant ID. TID is basically the tenant ID, and OID is basically the organizer ID. Okay. Why we went through this? Because this is important, because this is how we would be using this team meeting URL, we would need to extract this information from the URL, because once you schedule a meeting, you don't get anything else other than a meeting URL, right? So that is our source of information from where you should be know that where you want your bot to be added. Okay, so this is how you will do it, and this information we need to call the graph API also, the create call graph API. Okay, so now let me walk you through the Power Automate. Okay. So first we will talk about the first Power Automate. Okay, so the first Power Automate is send bot to the meeting, and it is manually triggered meeting. Okay, but what you can do is you can have a scheduled meeting or anything. The only source of information you would need is a meeting URL. Okay, which would be here. Okay, so what I have is I have this meeting URL. I'm not using this as in this demo, at least for now. This I have kept it here so that I can directly use it and join the meeting as required. The second parameter is basically our calling API endpoint URL. Okay, so this is very important. This is where the webhook is being hosted. Okay, so in my case, it is as it was hosted in the ngrok URL. We are putting that particular URL, and then you are initializing a variable with the graph API URL. So we are using this particular graph API URL, which is communication slash beta slash communication call. Okay, I'll talk about that. And then we have thread ID, and this thread ID is nothing but the meeting ID, which I said, which we can extract from this. For simplicity, I'm not parsing the URL and splitting and getting all this information, but this can be easily done. Okay, we have seen in the previous session there are many data operations actions which Farhan has explained, where we can use to split this and we can get the required information and then assign it to the variable. Then we have user ID. The user ID is basically the organizer ID, and then we have tenant ID. It's something which we will get as a part of URL. Okay, so if you see all this information is say in the URL, we just have to extract it and initialize it. And then what we are doing is we are basically making an HTTP post request to communication graph API, and the communication graph API is this particular endpoint. Okay. Now, if you see here, there are certain dynamic parameters which we are using. Okay, and then there is a request object. So this request object I have directly copied from Microsoft documentation URL only. And if you go to this particular URL in the create call, it says this is basically a create call API which enables your bot to create an outgoing peer-to-peer call or group call or join an existing meeting. Okay, and they have also given some examples here. So if we are particularly interested in our case in example number 5, which says join a scheduled meeting with service hosted media. Okay, now service hosted media is basically kind of an once somebody joins a meeting or somebody calls to a bot cannot, he is not a human, right? So we have to automate the responses and everything, but in our case we don't need that. But if you want, what you can do is you can have some audio files, okay, which can be played as soon as somebody calls the bot. Okay, so this can be used in the automated voice response system in the IVR also. So we are particularly interested in this joint schedule meeting, and this is the request object which is required. Okay, and as I said, the things which are important here is the callback URL. Okay, which we have to pass the actual web hook endpoint URL, and then the second thing is the thread ID. Okay, which is our meeting ID. Okay, and then the third thing is in the organizer, in the user object, we have to pass the ID, which is basically the organizer ID, which also we get from the URL itself. And then we have tenant ID, okay, which again we get from the URL itself. Okay, and here also we have to pass the tenant ID. Now, if you would have noticed, okay, these are the only things which I'm passing dynamics. All other things are static, okay, which is not required in my case because doesn't need to be an automated system or anything, IVR system or anything. So we are calling this communication graph API, okay, and we are making this post request to this particular endpoint, and then in the response we will get certain things. Now if you remember, I was talking about the states, right? Like what happens. So if you see, it says the first response would be state establishing, okay, when a connection is being kind of initiated but it has not been done. So this is the notification. When is this a notification, it means the webhook response which we get. If it is establishing, it will still send you establishing with this particular format, like in the resource data you will get the state as an establishing. Once it's established, you will get this kind of response with the state established. Okay, why this is important? Because this we have to understand and we have to use this JSON response to parse in our second Power Automate, which we'll be talking about. And then this is the third roster information which we get is on the callback, where we will get all the resource data and the participant information. Okay, so we are merely interested in this because this is where we will get the participant information. Okay, so if we talk about this response, okay, if I put it into a sample JSON viewer, okay, where I have captured it from my previous demos which I have done, you can see that this is my custom attributes. Okay, you can so ignore this part. What the webhook will start calling from is from the value 0, wherein it will first give you all these 4 attributes. Okay, and here if you would have noticed in the resource URL, call slash the GUID which you see is basically your call ID. Okay, so this we have to extract. This will give us that this participants are unique to this particular call ID. Okay, now when I say call ID, why it is important? Because you can use the same Teams meeting link to create multiple to join multiple sessions. Like for example, I have in the past I have also used the same meeting, okay, to test my scenarios, and I'm now also doing the same in the demo itself. Okay, so every time a first participants who joins, okay, using the same URL, a call ID is uniquely generated, which gives you the information about that particular session. So right now, this would be about the bot joining, then this user Siddharth Vagasia joining, and then the guest joining. And all of this roster information would have an unique call ID, which we can extract it from here. Okay. So this we are extracting, we are putting it in the call ID here. And then within resource data you will get the actual information about the users. Okay, so as there were, this is the third response. When the third guest user has joined, we got the three length of the array was 3. And the first one, this would be basically the bot. Okay, how do you identify whether it's a bot or not? That you can do using in the identity you can see it is an application. But if it would have been a normal user, within identity object you will get the user object, and within that user object you will get the information like his display name, his tenant id, whether he is an AAD user or a guest user, and you will also get whether he is muted, whether he is waiting in the lobby. So there is very limited information which we get, and I guess this might be because of the privacy reasons of what all things can be, stored or exposed who has joined the meetings. But I think the display name and the user ID and everything, which is what we would might need, based on, like for example, it's a tenant ID, we would know that this user has joined from which organize using which organization account or something. Okay, and if you go to the guest third response, okay, we'll still get the identity information. Within identity information we will have the display name, and with display name we always guess, the guest is in bracket, which can be a one way of identifying whether he's a guest or not. When it is a guest, it means that he has not joined using any Microsoft 365 account. Okay, if somebody is joining using a different Microsoft 365 account, it means whether he is an assigned in user. You will get the identity provider as AAD. You won't get none. Okay, and then the basic information whether is muted, whether is in lobby. Okay, so this is the response which we are getting, and this is the response we have to pass in our second power automate. So this is my second power automate, which is add participant to the list. And what we are doing here is the trigger point, as I mentioned, is when an HTTP request is received. And this is the HTTP post URL, which is been used in my bot code also. Okay. And I'm giving that this would be the schema which we will get. Okay. Then we are using data operation to parse this JSON so that we understand the response. Okay. Um, this is basically once you have a sample request, sample response, you can use generate from the sample and do it here. I think the previous session we have seen usage of the data operation also. Then we will initialize the variable call ID. Okay, so what we here in the expression, we are splitting the request body, and within request body we are getting the resource URL. Okay, my parameter, and we are splitting it based on the particular pattern, which is everything after calls. Okay, and between the participant is my call ID, which will give me this is my call ID. So this is basically an advanced expression which we have to use, which we would have to use very frequently in this case also, to get the call ID. Then has left is just a variable which we would be using later. And then what we are doing is we are parsing the resource data. Okay, so as I said that the once you go to value, you will get this resource data, and this resource data you will only get when there is some participant in the whether it be a bot or somebody. So what I have done, I have used the scope wherein if I did not receive the resource data, it means I don't have to do anything. But if I have received the resource data, then I will go ahead and do something. Okay. Once I have received the resource data, I am looping through that particular object. So if you see here, the expression says, if you see here, we are saying the body.parseJSON underscore resource data, which is the output of this, and we are looping through it. And then we are checking whether the identity user is empty or not. Why we need this? Because what we have to do is we have to ignore the entry which was at the 0th index, which is basically the bot. Okay, we don't want to add bot to the participant information. So if the user is basically, if we found that the user is empty, it means he is an bot. It is an bot, and we have to ignore it. So I'm checking whether it is empty. If it is false, it means if it is not an empty, then we will go ahead and do our things. Okay. Then we are composing the user ID based on the identity object again. And then first thing we have to do is we have to check whether the entry is already there in the participant information list or not, right? So we are using get items action here. We are using the filter query, which again we have seen in the previous example using OData filter. We pass the user ID equal to the user ID which we got and the call ID, which this will give me the unique participant which are already there in the database, right? Using this call ID and this user ID column. Then we are checking whether we found anything. If we did not found, it means that this user ID does not exist against this call ID. It means he is a new participant and I have to create a new entry with the event type as join. And then we are extracting the display name, whether he is a guest or not. As I said, whether he is a guest or not, there are certain things to do that. Okay. In this case, I'm just using that if the AAD user is yes or no. If AD user is yes, then he is not a guest. If no, then he is a guest user. Okay. And then we are just creating an entry. So this is how we are finding. Okay. Like the logic would be go and check in the database that like for this particular call ID and the user ID which we got in the response, if there is an entry there, it means he was already there and we will ignore it. If not, we will add the participants. Okay. So this take care of adding a participant when somebody joins the meeting, right? Now the next stage is we might have an scenario also wherein in the same roster somebody has joined and somebody has left, correct? So for that, what we will do is we will do the other way around, right? We will fetch first all the participants from the this thing using the call ID. We want pass user ID. We will say using this call ID and give me all the participants where the event type is join. Okay. Then we will apply the loop on the data which we have, and we will set the variable has left to true. Okay, this is just initializing because if we don't found it means he has left, right? And then we are applying for each to check whether the participant has left. So now when my loop is running on the users from here, and if I did not found in my resource data, it means that he has left. And what I have to do, if I found it, sorry, if I found it, if it equal to ID, it means he has not left, he is still there, and we will say the has left variable to false. But if I did not found, it means he has left. And what we are doing is we are initializing it with the true. And in the next step, in the next step, if has left condition is true, then we are again getting this entry from the SharePoint list. I'll tell you why. Because you remember when we are getting the current state of roster, right? It doesn't tell me that somebody has left, and I don't have his other information like who has left. So what I have to do is I have to again, call the get item API and to get his display name, his user ID, his call ID, and other information. And then I just have to create the left entry. This could have been avoided. We can still use, the same object like which is there in the user ID. But to make again an API call to get the required information, we are adding this. And here, if we are what we are filtering, like with information where call ID is this, where the user ID is this, and event type is equal to left. And we found that it means that we have to create an entry with the participant left. So this is where we will create the entry so that we will know that the participant has left now. Okay, so this is basically the main Power Automate which does the heavy lifting. Okay, all other things are part of my solution, which where other different components are coming together, to club this and making it whole as a solution. Okay, now what I mean, there would be different the things which we can use, right? Rather than using SharePoint loops, you could also use SQL. Okay, and rather than doing the parsing in the Power Automate, you can also do it in the Node.js side. There can be different flavor of the same solution, but the main purpose of this session would was to kind of explain like there are ways to capture participant information using this kind of components. Plus we can also, there are different if we would like to extend this, there are different possibilities also which would be there. Okay, so again these are the components which were there. I have explained the technicality of it. Hope it makes it would have made sense. Okay. Now, because I have some time, I'll just quickly walk you through the communication graph APIs. Okay. Uh, this is important because in my solution we are just using create call APIs, right, wherein we are just posting it. But there are other endpoints also available through which we would be able to do other automation. We can call that graph API and do the other automations also. Okay. So this communication graph API is part of graph API, okay, which can be used which will give us the information related to the calls. When I say calls, it can be one-to-one call, it can be group call, it can be teams meeting. Everything is at the end, calls which are happening. Then it says, you can build application bot with let X as a participant in a call, and you can create and retrieve message on behalf of the user. So this can be one of the use case also, like if you wanted to, get the messages and store it somewhere. Okay. There might be certain privacy policy again involved here. Okay. You cannot make the API get the messages using application permission. If you want to do that, you have to contact Microsoft and give the business justification, and depending on the region where you are, and according to the country's governance policy, I mean privacy policy, they might approve it or they might reject it. But there are ways to do things. Okay. um, Now, which are the other use cases? Like what you can do is there are REST API endpoints available wherein you can create join one-to-one call and group call. So this is what we have used. Then there is then there is an IVR calls endpoints also, which will give you methods related to automated responses within your Teams meeting. Then there are participants endpoints available, which can give you the participant list, and there are other endpoints through which you can invite a participant, you can remove delete a participant, which can be used. Okay. And like in this example also, what if somebody has joined and we don't want them to join, we want the meeting to be conducted within specific users only. Okay. Then maybe we have that schedule, we can call the graph API and find the all the invitees of the meeting. Okay. And then we can compare it and we can remove it. There are endpoints available for removing also a participant. Then there are meeting endpoints, which wherein you can create a meeting, you can schedule a meeting using graph API. Then you can retrieve the call records based on the call ID. And there are presence APIs also. These are newly added, wherein you can get the presence information of the user in Microsoft Team, whether he is away, whether he is active, example. Okay. Again, this is, I want to highlight this because this is what we have used. Okay. And this is where the permissions are being given in the Microsoft documentation, what all permission would be required. And this is the HTTP post request. Okay. Now, what are the possibilities, right? Okay. So we talked about this. Okay. There are possibilities to delete a participant. Endpoint is available. Possibilities to mute a participant. We might have seen a scenario wherein in the meeting, somebody unknowingly unmute himself. Okay. Like if that might be the case, and if we know, if we like who are the organizer or presenter of a particular Teams meeting, and we keep that information somewhere, and whenever we get the roster, okay, sorry, I can show you one thing. Like if you have seen the JSON object, okay, of in the response data, it also give you whether he is muted or not. Okay. So based on this, you can choose whether he is not muted and whether he is supposed to speak. Okay. If not, we can call an API and we can mute him. Okay. So these are the possibilities. I mean, this also can be done. You just have to extend this use case to different things. Then you invite new participant. You can delete and hang up. So when I said delete and hang up, it means basically using Graph API. Bot can hang up themselves. Okay. But if you want to remove somebody, it would be the delete participant API endpoint which you would be using. Then you can update the recording status. Okay. This is like when you say update recording status, it means either you can start and stop the recording automatically. Okay. Frankly, I tried this. Okay. But there are certain limitations on what we can do. We can start automatic recording or not. Okay. But API is available, documentation is available, but I guess this either is not working or I am missing something. But when I try to do this update recording status, okay. Then you can also change the screen sharing role, like somebody accidentally starts sharing the screen, okay, and or somebody made somebody presenter, sorry, you cannot control when somebody start sharing the screen. But if somebody made somebody else presenter and you don't want him to be presenter, right, then you can change this, okay, you can make him again a member so that he won't be able to share the screen. Then you can mute application and unmute, okay, this is again important, wherein you can mute all the users within an application, and you can also unmute it. Okay, so these are the possibilities of using this simple use case. I have just 5 minutes, okay, and I think I'm almost done with my session. These are the useful links, okay, which will give you the idea about the concepts which are being used here. And to create the Power Automate, that is something which you have to build by ourselves, right? And with that, I am open to Q&A. We have 5 to 6 minutes. If anything, yes, I would like to answer.
Thank you so much, Siddharth. That was a really insightful session. I don't see any questions as of now, but if anybody has any questions, please post them on the chat. Um, and Siddharth, I'd also recommend if you could post your contact of social media or something on the chat so that people can reach you out when they're trying this.
Sure, sure, no problem. I can do that.
So everybody, if when you're trying this, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out Siddharth and he'll be happy to help.
Thanks, yes. Thank you again for the opportunity, and thanks for the organizer. If anything, I'm still around in the chat window if I can answer this.
Great, thank you so much. And I'll stop the recording.